Hi, I'm Dr Malcolm Davis, Senior Analyst in Defence Strategy and Capability at the Australian Strategic Policy Institute in Canberra. I'm with Dr Marcus Hellyer, who's just written a superb report on long-range strike capabilities for Australia. So we're here to have a chat to talk about Australia's challenges in terms of developing and acquiring long-range strike. Marcus, great to chat. Do we have a capability gap in long-range strike for the Australian Defence Force?
Hi Malcolm, yes we do, but that's not just my opinion, that's the opinion of the previous government and the current government. So in 2020 the previous government put out its Defence Strategic Update saying the ADF needed more offensive capabilities, including long-range strike, to impose greater cost on our potential adversary and at greater range from Australia. In opposition, the current government agreed with that assessment, and since they've been in power, they've reinforced that. So recently, the Deputy Prime Minister and Defence Minister Richard Marles spoke about this topic. He used this new term, interesting term, called impactful projection, which I've stolen for the title of this piece. But when you sort of unpack that term, I think what he's really talking about is a kind of classic Defence of Australia kind of approach, based around a deterrence by denial approach. But with greater range than we've sort of traditionally spoken about. And that's because, as you well know, PLA capabilities are increasing in range. So they can reach out and strike us. Particularly, and you've written about this too, if our worst case scenario is realised of PLA capabilities lodging in the archipelago and islands to our north, much of Australia can be threatened by Chinese strike capabilities. So we need the ability to deny them that being able to lodge there and to be able to respond if they do. That's my reading of where the current government is at, and it's my strong suspicion that the DSR is looking at options to address that capability gap. We're not saying don't get SSNs, that's locked in. We're not challenging that, but I think even the best case prognostication of when we're getting SSNs is, somewhere towards the back end of the 2030s. So we need more capability sooner. Now you might say, well, don't we have Joint Strike Fighter? Can't we use that? Well, you and I are both big fans of the Joint Strike Fighter. But any fighter plane is going to have limited range. Even with air-to-air refuelling, it can't reach out far enough. With a range of 1,000 kilometres roughly, 1,500 with air-to-air refuelling, that doesn't cover much of the Indo-Pacific, doesn't cover the archipelagos to our north. So we need, I think, longer range strike capability. And in this report with my colleague Andrew Nichols, who's done some really good cost analysis, we've looked at a range of those options.
All right, take us through those options. I mean, the cover is indicative that you favour one particular option, but I'd get you to explore everything and ask you why you think that particular option that you're alluding to on the cover is the one we should get.
Well, I think the hidden ones for our viewers, there's the cover lurking underneath there is the B-21, which the Deputy Prime Minister said is a cool plane. I think we both agree it's a cool plane. We're pretty agnostic about whether Australia should get it. I mean, we don't even know if the Americans would sell it to us at this point. So all we're really saying is trying to look at the pros and cons of the B-21. And our overall recommendation is it's worth the government investigating, and talking to the Americans about, getting information so we can make an informed assessment about it. What we're trying to do in this report is get some information out there as best we can about what it would cost, what a schedule would be, what capability does it offer, and what sorts of roles could it perform. There's still a lot of uncertainties out there, so we're not, definitely saying we've got to go and get it. And there are also downsides to it as well. So, we're doing due diligence and looking at a range of options that could deliver long-range strike for Australia. My feel is the B-21 is the best capability option. It's the gold standard option, but that comes at a lot of cost. So our estimate is 25 to 28 billion roughly to acquire a squadron of B-21s.
That would be 12 aircraft, I presume.
About 12, 12 aircraft. Is that the right number? I don't really know. You'd have to do a lot of analysis to sort of work out exactly what effect you want to generate and how many aircraft. We've assumed 12 aircraft, about 25 to 28 billion, which is a lot. The Department of Defence doesn't have that money sitting around, so either the government would have to give them new money, or you'd have to do some pretty big muscle movements in terms of cancelling projects or delaying them a long way out. So, yeah, it's a big decision, and the annual operating cost would probably be about $500 million a year, so a bit less than the Collins class submarines, but in the same ballpark as Super Hornets and Growlers. So it would be a big ongoing operating cost. So
now, surely the most important thing besides cost is timelines. Given that the submarines are not appearing until the late 2030s, how soon could we get the B-21, do you think?
Well, again, that's a great question, and there's no firm answers. Like, I'll reiterate, we don't even know if the US would give it to us. The US Secretary of the Air Force suggested they would when he was put on the spot by ASPE's Brendan Nicholson. My sense is they would. If they're going to give us SSNs, it's hard to see they wouldn't sell us B-21 bombers. The schedule, we've looked at two schedules, a kind of do it as fast as you can schedule. So, if the US gave us early production slots, we'd be acquiring earlier in the learning curve, so it'd be more expensive. So that's your $28 billion option. You could maybe, pull out all stops, get IOC, so initial operating capability of the first 4 aircraft by about 2030, slightly slower, slightly cheaper, aim for 2032. You'd get those first 4 aircraft in service by roughly 2032. So again, depends on the US giving us production slots, but that's one of the questions.
And certainly the B-21, as was suggested by the US Secretary of Defence, is an open architecture system. So it's designed to be easily upgraded in terms of software and hardware. And I would imagine that if we did get it, we'd be able to enjoy the benefits of that in terms of continually updating the aircraft to give new capabilities. And also, it's designed to be part of essentially a crewed autonomous teaming system. We're developing the MQ-28 Ghostbat Loyal Wingman type platform. Potential there for the B-21 and Loyal Wingman to work together, I think, is quite high.
Yeah, look, I think one of the things you hit on there is a key aspect of a bomber is that it's a very flexible platform. So if you look at the history of the B-52 bomber, the B-1 bomber, the B-2 bomber that the US have had in service, the roles of those aircraft have developed over time. So sometimes when I mention the B-21, people say, but we don't want to strike Beijing. We don't want to drop nuclear weapons on China. And I agree. I'm not saying that's the purpose we should be acquiring them for. But those US bombers began their careers as nuclear bombers, and over time they've evolved. And so they've been used for a whole range of missions, including maritime strike. The US has put the long-range anti-ship missile on the B-1. They've been used for close air support, a whole range of conventional missions. And that's how I see them being used for Australia. So in that kind of defence of Australia, deterrence by denial role, sort of, interdicting any adversary activity in our region to our north. So I'm not really seeing this as, we're not going downtown Beijing with this capability, but they could perform a whole range of missions. So if an adversary tried to establish a forward operating base, deploy missiles or aircraft that could strike Australia, they could interdict that. They can do anti-ship roles. They can drop mines. Theoretically even do anti-submarine warfare, striking adversary submarines in port. So very flexible platform.
Now, one of the key challenges that I know you and I have faced in discussions online about the B-21 is you get people coming and saying, well, we can just stick a bunch of JASMs on C-130 or P-8 and fly it up there, and that will do things a lot cheaper. What are the challenges of things like rapid drag and palletized munitions in terms of our strategic context, in terms of dealing with a growing Chinese challenge?
Yeah, so we look at a range of options. We look at missiles, we look at palletized munitions, we look at autonomous systems, and there's good things to be said about all of those. Like I said, B-21 is kind of the gold standard. I think those other options don't deliver the same level of capability, but they're certainly, on the whole, more affordable. Good thing about palletized munitions, so essentially, dropping a bunch of missiles out the back of a C-130 or a C-17 is that we have those aircraft already, we're ordering those missiles already, and as airlifters, they can operate from a bunch of airfields, so you can generate that kind of mosaic effect to complicate an adversary's planning. So lots of aircraft operating from lots of different airfields, more survivable, it's that whole dispersal strategy. So there's good things to be said about that. The problem is they're not stealthy. The B-21's main weapon is this very high degree of stealth. A C-130 is not survivable in a contested environment. So it's going to have to operate outside the adversary's air defence envelope, which means long-range missiles. And one of the things we explore in this report is that long-range missiles are actually going to be really expensive. They're not a silver bullet in the sense of if we get lots of long-range missiles, they're going to be quite affordable. If you want range out of a missile, it's going to be big, and that means expensive. So, B-21 looks expensive, sure, but a system where we buy lots and lots and lots of long-range missiles will also be expensive.
And certainly you could see the B-21 essentially having a role to kick down the door, to take down key air defence systems in an anti-access environment, to then allow C-130s with palletized munitions to operate.
Look, it offers you a whole bunch of different ways of operating, it may be too expensive, or we don't go down that path, but there are other things we can be doing to get long-range strike. So whether it's palletized munitions, you mentioned GhostBat, I think wherever we end up going, manned or unmanned teaming solutions are going to be a big part of that. Potentially, a future big brother of the GhostBat is part of that. So potentially a twin engine version, has longer range, can carry a bunch of munitions. There's a lot of solutions out there. So, I'm not trying to dictate the solution here. We're trying to inject a bit of, information in there, certainly around what would be involved in operating a B-21. Once you look at that, then you can sort of do your trade-offs and go, okay, yeah, too much money, here's another option, or, too many issues around that one, here's another one. So we're just sort of trying to inject a bit of information so we can have a better informed debate about a range of strike options that Australia could pursue. But ultimately the B-21, it's the gold standard, but that comes at a price. Maybe the government's willing to pay that price. If not, there's some other options to consider.
Marcus, it's a really interesting report. I know I'm looking forward to reading it and using it extensively in my future research, and I'm sure our readers will look forward to reading it as well. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Malcolm.